So let's look at, let's understand the background in terms of why we are looking at studying operations management specifically in the, tourism and hospitality sector. Now, the main aspect here is that when you look at a running business, which is providing services or different types of services, whether it's hotel services, stay, lodging, food, beverage, whatever it is. In a running business, at some stage, you need to look at, basically 3 E's of, making the business successful. They are generally called the efficiency, economics, and obviously looking at, effectiveness of running the business. So 3 E's, some stage when you have a running business, it's not a startup and, you are dealing with a lot of customers. Operation management becomes important is because in this side of the piece, in this side of the business, what you basically look at is that you have to maintain the level of quality, the level of service that the business is providing, and you are looking at customers, same type of operations, repetitive side of operations are being run. And in order to have that working well, we look at operations management, or we look at setting procedures, policies, certain standards, which can then be reused again and again by the use of quality manual, operations manual by different staff and members of the, of the business in the operations team. So here the understanding is to look at putting into, more depth how management looks at dealing with, dealing with services that they need to provide in terms of leadership, in terms of, operational efficiency, productivity, especially in service-related industries. So when we talk about financial services, when we talk about retailing, when we talk about tourism, we talk about hospitality, all these industries are classified as service industries because you might be using some input or material coming in from manufacturing that is being processed, and an output of that is being provided to customers who are actually getting it as a service and then in return paying you for that particular service. So operation management is primarily looking at understanding the nitty-gritty of running the business. What are the basic procedures, processes involved in running that business, and how do we make those procedures, processes efficient, or something which I would put it this way, make them robust so that they are able to perform independently. And if somebody is to pick them up, or somebody is to find a problem, then they're able to pick up a policy or a procedure and then run through that to find a solution without having somebody else intervene into the into this matter. So if I just briefly look at the definition of operations management, what we are looking at primarily is it is a set of activities which enables a business or an organization to transfer some basic inputs, which are things like raw material, because that is at the end of the day being utilized to provide and make some provisions for it, and then provide an output, which is the service which the customer receives. So like in the case of bakery or restaurant, you're buying a lot of raw material like ingredients, grocery, fruit and veg, lots of things. That is processed within the kitchen by the chef, people working on it. And once that is processed, it is processed into dishes or, various items which become eatery or eatables, and that is served to customers, in the restaurant when they place orders. So that is the whole process of managing those activities will be basically, classified under something called operations, because you're utilizing certain raw material that requires input, processing on it, and once that is done, you create an output, and against which, against an order, you basically provide that output to the customer in terms of a service. Some part of this, when we look at another definition by Stevenson and Brown, what they said is that this particularly also involves moving or managing large part of inventory. So if I look at restaurant, maybe a small scale operation, but if I look at a hotel, wherein, if you look at the laundry department or the department which basically manages, all the stuff related to laundrette within the, within the hotel, what you will tend to see is that in those cases, the linen, the towels, everything which is to be done, it is done on an industrial scale. So here there is a management of inventory. That means, if 5 towels go missing, or, if a hotel is 5,000 rooms, and if 20 towels go missing, not an issue. But if 200 towels go missing and all the guests end up taking the towels, at some stage, you'll have to do a bit of a management to see that all the provisions which are included in the hotel to be able to deliver services, which is stay services, lodging services, or recreational services to the customers, are all forming a part of a process or an operational line wherein these things are not to be replenished, but obviously they go through a process wherein they're washed, linen, dry clean, and then they go back into the use. After a certain point in time of 2 years or maybe a year or so, depending on what we are talking about, they might have to be replaced because they've worn out or they've come to the end of their life cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
In a large scale business, it will also involve management of inventory. It will also involve, planning and scheduling to a large extent, because they know that, okay, if this has gone bad, the linen has gone bad, or the inventory has gone bad, that needs to be replaced, and there is no way that it can be replenished. So in those cases, the processes have to be there to be able to manage it and make that available rather than do it at the end. Another small example which I'll do is, if we look at an example of a small shop, which is a grocery shop, there is something which is a concept of something called minimum order quantity. So if the stock falls below a certain number, what the POS terminals or the point of sale terminals are able to do today is that if you fixed in some, defined some minimum order quantity to be available in stock in the store, and if it falls below that number, the POS is able to place the orders for replenishment with the manufacturers. So all this, which is set in terms of a process, actually falls within something called operations management.
Yes.
Now, the other thing which we look at in terms of largely the role of operations management, sometimes you will see that people working within the management team who are responsible for taking these decisions, they take 2 or 3 different types of decisions. One of the decisions primarily is strategic decisions. These are decisions, as we understand, which are long term. They are normally taken by senior management. These decisions can affect the organization from a perspective of 3 to 5 years, or 18 months to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And these decisions alter the direction of the business to a certain extent if it involves mergers and acquisition, or in some cases, if you're diversifying to add a product line, then these decisions are something called long-term decisions. Tactical decisions, primarily in operation management, OM refers to operation management, are primarily done wherein you're looking at strategically, not strategically, I'll not use the word strategically, in tactical decisions, you're looking at meeting a particular requirement which is posing a problem, or say, for example, is creating an issue. So in this case, if I look at that, if I go back to the example of a restaurant that I mentioned, and you're running low on certain provisions of, say, for example, certain bottles of wine, then what you'll have to do is take a tactical decision to either have that replenished, because the evening is still young and you're still expecting a lot of bookings and customers to come in. So you go out and buy local provisions from a local store, even if you're buying it at a higher cost, as against coming from a regular supplier who orders it where the orders are normally placed. So here the tactical decision is primarily done in order to ensure that no customer complaints are received. You have enough inventory to at least tide over for that particular evening in terms of having that wine available. And those then tend to be short-term decisions in particular, and they are done primarily to ensure that you are able to go past a particular problem, or go past a particular day or two until your stock or inventories are actually replenished. Then there are something called operational decisions. Now, operational decisions are decisions which are taken on a day-to-day basis. These decisions are taken by managers. So if you imagine that you run restaurant stores, or you have a number of restaurants, and here the owner of the restaurant basically is, has taken the, has delegated the decision-making responsibility on a day-to-day basis to the manager of that restaurant. So the owner of the restaurant will basically focus on things like, maybe when the cash is to be collected, how much inventory is being used. So he's going to be focused on monthly decision-making, which is to do with buying of inventory, looking at stocks, creditors, debtors, payments to be made, invoices coming in, the customer flow. But on a day-to-day basis, if there's a problem which has arisen, that means the customer has made a complaint. Who will solve it? The person who will be solving it will be primarily looking at, the person who takes these decisions, in the case of, in the store or in that restaurant, and he is
Yes.
basically responsible for showing, leadership, or for example, solving that particular situation, and that is where the operational decisions would come in. In the first learning outcome, we are essentially going to be focused on understanding, things which are related to why operations management is studied, why this is relevant, for any services related business, and last but not the least, what are the key areas of operations management that we need to be aware of when we study this particular topic or this particular concept in the case of services industry. Now, one of the slides that I put together to understand the operations, and the function of operations within a business is, if you look at a large business. So I've taken the example of IKEA, or IKEA, which is a Swedish furniture company, and they have lots of things that they produce. So I think in terms of their product line, they have maybe 27 different categories of product, and each of this product, they are within the furniture sector. Some of these products, when I say 27 lines, if I look at just bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, each of them are a product line. But within that, you have maybe thousands and thousands of products, if not thousands, hundreds of products. So within a bathroom, or within a kitchen, within a bedroom, within a living room, when they sell that concept, they sell a lot of different products and SKUs. So here, one of the biggest challenge which they have in order to ensure that they have ample inventory and resources for products which they are displaying in their stores, which customers can place an order, they have to look at the concept of something called inventory management. They have to make sure that the products which they are marketing, or their department, which is basically sales and marketing, is actually advertising. They need to be in stock in inventory, and they need to be made available in stores, because you're not going to be in a position to basically say, okay, this item is not available. When it comes back in stock, you can come back to the store. So there, the concept is that you come in, you choose the product, you see the product, you choose the product, and you take it home while you're going back. So in cases, when we look at understanding a large company and its operations, what we will find is that a couple of things which become important for them in terms of managing operations would be to look at managing inventory, managing resources which manage that inventory. They need to look at things like the the volume of sales which is happening from each of the stores. They need to also be able to predict the type of products which are being sold and which products are in demand. And considering the demand for those products, they have to ensure that their supply chain or their inventory is in line to basically service that demand. So if you see the key terms that I'm using right now in terms of talking about operations, I'm looking at inventory, I'm looking at resources, I'm looking at input and output, which is basically products being sold, products currently being marketed or advertised, and last but not the least, the study of the demand and supply situation for those products, because some products might sell in some of the stores, but some of the products might not sell in some of the other stores. That does not mean that they will mutually stock some of these products in different stores across the country. But considering that they well understand the culture, the economy, the preferences and the needs of the consumer in that location, their product line will be geared enough to ensure that these are the products, as per research they've carried out or pilot surveys that they've done, are going to be in demand in that particular location. So when we look at the concept of obviously operations management, we are looking at understanding what could be the economic factors affecting the business, what kind of product lines which the company would have or choose, and last but not the least, how would they be content with the competitors offering in the market. So all these parameters have to be taken into account when we look at the concept of operations management in a particular business. Now, the other things that we'll also look at is when we talk about product line, and as an example, I'm taking care of IKEA, and there is something when I say product line could be having length and breadth. That means if I look at just say curtains, or if I just look at beds, or if I look at blinds, they would not just have one kind of a blind or one kind of bed, but they will have different types and all types possible under that particular, umbrella. So you'll have a single bed, a queen's bed, a king's bed, a super king size bed. You'll have bunk beds, double-decker beds, all types of beds which are available. So they have a product line just under bedrooms, which is just one product, which is beds. But the beds would be, even when I say product line, they have a length and depth of all types of products available under one roof. So in order to effectively manage those SKUs or inventory, what they also have to look at is managing and having a control over their supply chain. So suddenly, if there's a demand for a certain product which starts to go up, the first time it will be called suddenly, but the second time if it happens and the business is not anticipated or the person managing that product line is not anticipated that in the company, that would mean that either they will lose a lot of orders, they will lose a lot of revenue, and they will have a lot of dissatisfied customers. So in those cases, supply chain or supply chain control also is something which is covered to a certain extent under something called operations management. Now, case in slide, I put in case in point, I put 2-3 slides in here where it talks about, the launch of IKEA stores in India, and obviously how they've looked at, tailoring their demand, tailoring their products to meet the demand in the market, which is basically the taste of the consumer, the type of requirements which it has, and also the price points which it has mitigated to ensure that the product offering which they're introducing in India, when IKEA launched, I think 2 or 3 years back, are in line with the market requirements for the Indian consumer. So in this case, what we look at is, it is important to understand the process behind it, and in the case of a process, how this process is finally put to. When I say the process, how do you evolve to a process? If things happen randomly, then you cannot set some sort of a process or a procedure in place, because these are things happening randomly, there is no reoccurrence, and you do not know whether this is something which is going to be required in the future. But in the case of operation management, you clearly know that these things happen time and again. In the case of, say, a marketing cycle, they have an annual plan. They clearly know that during these periods across the year, there'll be a surge in demand. They need to have more inventory and they need to have more product lines available in the store, because this is the time frame during which there will be a larger sale or more requirement of some of their products that they stock and sell from the store. So when you are able to anticipate the demand from the consumer and build in predictability, what the operations management as a department or as a field within the business helps to do is to basically create processes which can be used. And processes are nothing but a series of activities that you run to be able to be used again and again, so that every time you use that process or carry out that activity, you get the same output. Like in the bakery, the baker makes the breads. Now, every time, if this process has to be done, the output in terms of the bread has to be the same. It can't be different. So the selection selection of ingredients and everything, that the recipe, the ingredients which I use are used in a very specific, measured manner, so that the output being created is, absolutely the same. So it's all about process and building processes, and these processes all help to optimize, efficiency, economy, and create effectiveness in terms of productivity in the business. And that is what the first learning outcome actually focuses on, in terms of, giving you a bit of a background in terms of why we study this, definitions of it, and then at a later stage, why this process becomes important when the business is set, the products are set, your customers are, set, you have a set demand, which is coming in from the market for the products. And then because of the ecosystem that you're working in, you are able to you need to be able to bring predictability into the business. And this predictability can be brought in if you have control over something called the operations of your business. And some of the slides, basically talk about this, but over the years, this concept has also evolved. And what we look at is business process modeling, or BPM as we call it, as a process. And what that means is that the company's vision and mission, when it is translated into a strategy, a short-term or a long-term strategy. And that strategy basically clearly embodies three processes. One is operation, second is something called design, and the third is something called transition. So companies which are moving ahead and are, making changes in the way they work and go to market in the organization sometimes go through the process of something called business process modeling, BPM. And this particular process involves marrying in of strategy, the current set of operations, and the transition which is going to bring when they are going to reorient the business. So this is one of the other concepts that we look at. So sometimes, and I'll give you a simple example here, how does this concept work? When you look at, say, here a good point would be to look at a manufacturing company. You look at cars, for example, or you look at producing something in masses. Now, when the manufacturing is happening, and if a certain type of defect or a certain type of issue is being encountered again and again, what that would mean is that the management would be wanting to find out the root causes of why this issue is coming up again and again. And because this is related to quality to a certain extent, because either the products are not then passing or not being released into the market because there are issues coming up, this basically would fall into the remit of something called quality control. Now, in order to boost the quality of the product so that the output, when the input is done in terms of raw material and other things, and when the assembly of things are happening, there is somehow something going wrong which is producing the wrong output. And that would invoke something called the process of quality, because quality control will come in and then break down that process to see where the error or issue is coming across. Now, in order to solve that, what will happen is you will see that sometimes organizations improve, in order to bring the changes to, in order to bring the improvements, they include the process of something called quality control. And this quality control process, can be applied through various different techniques. You have total quality management, you have the Deming cycle, you have, lots of different models which are available, Kaizen, just in time, those kind of models which have come up over the years. Six Sigma, for example. So Six Sigma came from GE, Motorola. You look at Kaizen, just in time came from the Japanese company Toyota. And when they look at utilizing these models to kind of solve these issues or problems, which basically eliminate those issues coming in that production line, you will basically do this through a process, something called business process modeling. So you're trying to carry out a set of activities which will help you get the output, or get a control over how the output is going to be produced. And this process is also an operational process, and that is why we study something called BPM under this particular concept. There is another thing which is called lean management, or basically lean management techniques, and this is primarily brought in when you look at a lot of these manufacturing companies produce a lot of waste, and what they are then asked to do is basically look at reduction of waste. So a lot of material from large grocery stores in terms of food and eateries going to landfills. Now, in order to reduce the impact, of let's put it this way, impact of let's put it this way, the wastage which needs to be reduced. What most companies then at some point in time do is follow something called lean management techniques, and these techniques then help to reduce the waste being generated from a particular system or a process which produces an output. So a simple example would be when you look at a production line producing, say for example, again let's go back to bakery. What will happen is the dough and other things being produced which is used to create bread. Sometimes you will see a lot of wastage being done. So in order to reduce that wastage, processes will have to be, what quality control does is works on processes to basically look at minimizing that wastage. And minimizing that wastage in the long run helps the company save money, because you're able to either recollect or, reduce the waste, or basically recollect and recycle it into the system more output. Yes. So these 3-4 things is what we have essentially covered in something called learning outcome 1, starting with the definition, looking at the key elements of operation, looking at why operation management is important and how it is related to the strategic objectives of the organization, And then what are the reasons why we need to pick up one example and understand, what does operation management help and how does it bring across advantages to a business when you apply this concept or have this department working on, creating processes and policies to be able to run those set of activities again and again, and that is then coined as something called operations management. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
in terms of, let's go to learning outcome 2 very briefly.
Yes.
And in terms of, learning outcome 2, what we do see is that after studying the definition and understanding the concepts of operation management, what we want to be able to do is understand the link between why operation management today is important within large organizations. So what we want to be able to see is how does operations as a department help in strategic planning for the organization. So if you look at large organizations like IKEA, they have say 5,000 products, 5,000 different types of SKUs or products, stock keep units. If these stock keep units have to be replenished, refreshed, updated, and then have that unique selling proposition for it to be sold against the competitors in the market, there has to be a refresh which has to happen from time to time, in these SKUs or new designs, new materials, new price points, new promotions have to be done. Now, how does this concept work when we look at doing repetitive sales, for example? Because IKEA, when you have introduced, say for example, when an IKEA store opens up in a particular city, what then tends to happen is that this is not like a small investment. It's a large store which occupies a lot of space, a lot of personnel. I think in any IKEA store, there is upwards of about 1,000 people working within the store. So when you look at a particular store, a particular investment, and opening in a particular location, what the management considers is that over a 10-year period, over a 15-year period, over a 20-year period, what will be the revenues or estimated revenues this store will actually bring in. So when they do long-term planning, when it is done, they do it from a context of understanding how this is going to be beneficial for the organization by opening a store, in this location rather than some other location. So here the concept is that the organization is actually looking at planning for the future, and from a future perspective, it is going to look at making a decision, which will allocate certain resources, financial, human resources, administrative, infrastructure resources for opening the store in that location. So how do we understand the link between long-term planning and operations management from a context of learning outcome 2? That is what we are going to be looking at studying in this learning outcome. So here, when we look at a bit of a recap, operations management, an area of business activity concerned with production of goods and services. You're using some raw material to do some input and then create an output which is sold as service to the customers. What is strategic planning? Strategic planning involves basically looking at organizational processes, marrying it with long-term strategy or long-term direction of the business, and then allocating resources to go after and get that, or basically go after and achieve that goal. A simple example that I would give here is that in your personal case, you must have done some strategic planning, and that planning is that I want to be able to complete my level 6 diploma, and for which you've allocated some time, resources, money, and effort you're putting in, and after that you're looking at studying level 7, and after that you want to go to a final goal, which is reaching an MBA degree. So this is the long-term plan for you in terms of which is what you've made of how you will go from step A or your current position to a desired position in about say 18 months time. And in order to realize that goal, what you've done is you put some resources, which could be financial, personal resources, financial resources, time, effort, and then you're making efforts to go in that direction to be able to achieve that. So there is some sort of planning that you put in place, and this planning is required for you to go from step A to, or place A to place B. So when we look at the concept and the link between strategic planning and operations management, what we do see is that when companies look at planning long-term goals, they have to look at some sort of, marrying the strategic goals and objectives put planning into place, allocate resources, and once that is done, in order to go from place A to B, they have to bring in operations, efficiency, economy, and effectiveness so that they are able to measure and then account for these goals and then achieve them over a point in time which has been set. A simple example that I would also give here, when I say simple, an example that I would give here is Marks and Spencer, which is now present in, I think, 20, 25 countries. Marks and Spencer decided that they will go absolutely green. They will try and make their waste, which they look at producing because of their operations in any location across the world, they will try and make that zero. So Marks and Spencer made something called Plan A, which was introduced in, I think, 2012 or 2014. And by 2020, they want to basically look at reducing all the, when I say they want to basically look at eliminating all the unnecessarily waste, which their operation actually ends up producing. So when we look at that plan, what we do get to see is that Marks and Spencer essentially, as one of the leading retailers, is committed to making reduction in terms of resources, wastage in terms of resources, and they want to basically look at reducing it in about a 6 years time. And here, when we say they want to reduce, they want to look at all sorts of reduction, whether it's loss in energy, low wages being paid to workers abroad, wherein they use subcontractors, suppliers, things like that. So they want to look at low carbon emissions, offset there, for example, waste management with regards to some sort of commitment that they're making towards the environment. And this plan is a 10-year plan. So I think started in 2014 is going to be, they want to achieve it by 2025. And this is a corporate strategy or a long-term plan which they put in place so that as an organization, they try and reduce, wastage. Now, the reason why they've done that is what they want to do is move in line with how the business and the environment is moving, wherein because of economic pressures, they are a global business, deal with different type of government legislation, laws across different geographies. They want to make their business quite efficient. They want to make their business, something which is, the lean, mean, and effective. So this plan was oriented and created primarily keeping in mind their suppliers, their customers, their stakeholders, employees, everything. And the whole idea of, putting this plan into place was that they want to remain a leader in the, say, food and grocery sector, in the premium food sector, you look at clothing sector, and this is where the core line of business lies for them. So here, what they want to look at is by bringing in, strategic planning for the business for the next 10 years, in line with the goals and objectives that they want to look at achieving within the organization. They have implemented now Plan A, and this Plan A will help them in, obviously increase efficiency within their business, make them more effective in terms of, when I say have less wastage and have more output in terms of, material that they're producing at low cost or costs that they want to achieve. And last but not the least, they want to have happy customers or happy employees while they do all this, so that what they want to ensure is that this plan then looks at meeting the ambitions of the community, ambitions of their employees, their staff, the customers, and their suppliers. So this particular plan, involves looking at making use of something called the 3 E's: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And this is one of the central frameworks or models that we study, in operations management. So this is an important concept. And what I've done is I've mentioned this here, and I've put some slide notes in the presentation when you look at to explain the concept in terms of why it is important.
Yeah.
I've briefly explained this here. Efficiency is basically, looking at, if I look at, going back 50 years, industrial revolution, when machinery and modernization, automation came in, essentially, you saw that a lot of things became more efficient. So if let me try and pick up an example. So let's look at efficiency. As you see that mobile phones, for example, we had mobile phones which were only voice enabled and text messaging. There were pagers before that, but as the technology has evolved, what we've seen is the same phone, hand phone, or the mobile phone that you have in the palm of your hands has become so powerful that it allows you to do emailing, photograph, recording, every sort of function that you want to do, even e-commerce buying. So how that has happened is because the modernization, the changes in technology have basically made it possible that the rapid advancement in technology has made it possible because the chips are becoming much more efficient, the battery life is becoming much more efficient, and because of which the smartphone is able to do more things than what a phone was able to do 10 years back. So 10 years back, we had maybe smartphones which could do one or two things like the Apple iPhone, when it was introduced in 2007, was just phone, email, maybe photographs, nothing else. But with the evolution of, the phones, what we see is they do a lot more things today as compared to what it did 10 years back. And when this product is in demand and you want to mass produce that product, what they tend to do is the factories from the US and the Europe have moved to Far East. And you see where because of availability of cheap labor or, efficiency and modernization of infrastructure has helped reduce overall costs for manufacturing, because what has happened is the same material is to be manufactured in the UK, an average employee would get 10 to 12 pounds an hour, but the same employee, same facility in the Far East would be at a much lower cost. And that is where, companies have looked at the model wherein they have started to outsource, have factories in locations wherein, it helps them bring control or have larger control on their, costs when they're looking at manufacturing. And when we look at effectiveness, this is primarily looked at, from a point of view of understanding how much profit does the company make. So how efficient are you? But when it is measured in terms of financial terms, the efficiency is not measured in terms of that, okay, the Honda car plant is producing 300 cars a day. The efficiency is fine, that is 300 cars, but effectiveness of that efficiency is being measured in profits that it is able to create. With the same manpower, the 3 shifts running, the factory is able to produce these many cars, which means the output has increased, which allows more cars to be sold and realize more profits or, more revenues coming into the company. So this concept has been explained, in Learning Outcome 2, because it's one of the main things that we need to pick up. The other thing that we look at is we need to understand what is the, relationship between cost, quality, and time. One of the key things when you look at, if you start to increase volume of production, what you will see is at some stage, if your quality is starting to go down, your cost is starting to go down because you are producing, more output on a particular day within the factory. It could mean that maybe the quality could get compromised because the output is increased. So in order to look at the concept of what is the relationship between cost, quality, and time, we need to look at understanding the 3 E's. And in these 3 E's, what we then look at finding out is that if you increase production without increasing the resources, you will see that the quality begins to slip. If you decrease production and you have, more time being spent in terms of products being produced, you will see the quality goes up, quality is maintained, but at the same time, the costs start to go up. So we need to be able to understand the relationship when we look at operations. Anybody who comes and works in the operations department will always be concerned with these 3 concepts of cost, quality, and time. And quality is inversely proportional to, cost. So if the costs go up, the quality, that means, is going up. It's directly proportional. If the costs go down, that means the volume has gone up. Or in some cases, the production has gone up. So this concept has to be understood when you work within, the operations side of things. And this concept is very important when we look at strategic planning. So when you look at a new car manufacturer actually putting up a plant in a location, what they tend to do is they start off slowly. They want the product lines, the products to, be produced, and then the manpower which is producing the products to get used to how the product line would operate, the cost would be, and what will be the output which the factory produces. At some stage, they start the second shift. At some stage, after a few number of months or years, they also look at a third shift wherein they know clearly Now the plant is completely well set. The employee, the manpower is well understanding the processes, utilization of the machinery, and everything is set. And that is where they then look at increasing production by maybe starting an additional shift. And that is where the process of mass production actually starts. Because at some stage when you start, you set up a plant, you hire manpower, you take them into training, you start producing output. Maybe the first only one shift is running. But at some stage when the processes are very well set, you have a very steady supplier chain, raw material is coming in on time, and the demand also is growing in the market, you start a second shift. And at some stage, the factories start performing optimally and all the three shifts are running because everything is working in for the business. That means there is great demand, the supply chain is set, and the manpower and the training and development has led to a stage wherein everybody knows or they work efficiently to be able to run this into three shifts as far as the plant is concerned. So there is some details being given on to understand why strategic planning is important, what is the process, and how this is then related to something called cost minimization and quality maximization. So there are a few slides which will kind of put efficiency versus effectiveness. So efficiency is primarily thrift and effectiveness is primarily quality. So how much does the plant produce, or what is the output being produced without having to compromise quality? We have a concept, something called parts per million, defects, which were initially, when we look at when automation started, industrialization started, in manufacturing industries, it was defects which were measured in terms of measuring quality. So how many defects were measured across parts per million? When we look at number of products being produced in quantities like million, and within that a defect number was predicted. So it is 2 parts per million. That means there could be 2 possible defects which could occur in about million parts being produced. So those concepts are basically talked about in these slides. It's purely theoretical, but what we want to be able to understand is these theoretical concepts is when you look at cost minimization, how does it affect cost quality? When you look at bringing in efficiency, how does it affect quality? And those are what I have put together in some of the slides primarily that you get to read in this learning outcome tool. Is that okay?
Yes.
And then towards the end, what I've done is basically put some benefits and advantages of why these are important from a standpoint of view of from operations management. So when we look at understanding operations management and strategic planning, there are 5 objectives which the management always has, and these objectives are related to these 5 objectives, which talk about when you are producing something, how much can be produced, and how say by people. Oh yeah, correct. So in terms of quantity, so if you have a certain amount of raw material, how much can it produce, and can it meet the requirements? Can they look at bringing in certain parameters or inclusion of certain parameters which could increase the output by a certain quantity or a certain percentage? That is where cost is looked at. When you look at quality, you cannot compromise on quality, because if the recall of that product is to happen, then that means at some stage when the decision making is happening, they do not compromise on quality related aspects, because that would mean that it could backfire if they're trying to make it too fast or trying to make too much of it by reducing, by increasing the number of quantities being produced. That could directly affect quality.
Quality.
Yeah.
Yes. Standard.
Speed, when we look at how quickly can that be produced. Sometimes when you get orders, you look at takeaways, you look at one of the things which I normally point out in operations management is when we look at these fast food outlets like Pizza Hut and Domino's and Papa John's pizzas, they essentially have a bit of an operational efficiency when these outlets are run. And it's a very good example to look at, because from the time of placing the order, in about half an hour you get the pizza delivered to your house. Now, if the delivery goes over half an hour, the pizza is normally offered free, and the manager in the outlet would actually credit your account so that next time you order, your order is actually delivered free of cost. So in order to build service levels, what they've looked at is the speed at which this service is being provided is also becoming important in certain industries. Because otherwise, if the pizza gets delivered in 45 minutes or in an hour, what you will see is that it becomes cold and the customer loses interest, and in those cases, it leads to complaint. So speed is also...
it will affect the brand. Yes, this will affect the brand.
Correct. It will affect the brand, and in long term, it will affect the reputation of the business, and people will with that. Dependability is also important, because sometimes when you look at placing an order with a particular manufacturer, you know that this manufacturer or this particular client is dependable. That means even if the client takes a bit more time, but the quality at which the price and the quality at which the product is delivered is something which meets your requirements. So sometimes when you look at supply chains, you place orders with suppliers which have been working with you for a number of years, rather than seek out a new supplier who's probably offering you a cheaper price, but there is no guarantee or no testability in terms of previous background of working with that supplier. And then in operations, you always look at flexibility. Flexibility is because sometimes you have to change with regards to the changes in demand in the market. So you have, when you look at most manufacturing organizations, they stock a lot of raw material and inventory. And if there is a change in the requirement, change in the demand in the market, the same raw material at some stage, not all of it, but some parts of the raw material can be used, repackaged, and used to design or fulfill requirements for other products. And that is why you will see sometimes raw material is actually stored as raw material within a lot of these manufacturing companies, because if the demand switches, they can actually use that same raw material to produce other goods and services which are in demand as far as the market is concerned. Now, apart from that, I think my suggestion would be to go through these slides and look at in terms of understanding these concepts. So for these 5 slides, which we discussed, the 5 points, I put in 5 individual slides to understand how each of these factors are looked at from a point of view of operations management. And then towards the end, what I've done is I've defined the benefits of having these work together in tandem. So you cannot drop one of the balls, like say I'm only going to focus on quality, not speed or dependability, and not flexibility and cost. So how this is to be juggled, or how you juggle these 5 parameters when you look at the concept of something called operations management. And towards the end, what we are looking at is, in the last part of the task, is what we want to do is understand these 5 parameters and talk about it from a point of view of a business, to explain this concept from an assignment perspective. So here I've taken the example of McLaren's Mercedes, which is one of the Grand Prix creams, and how they look at operations management, how they look at operational efficiency, because when they look at this particular sport, is a very competitive sport. So they try and shave off by making more efficient engines, and they are trying to shave off time by milliseconds in some cases. Like this particular car being introduced this year is quicker to Ferrari's car by 2 seconds, or 1.2 seconds. So it is that much operational. It is so much in detail that in this competitive sport, it is to do with more of operational efficiency. So even shaving off by bringing more efficiency into the design of the engine, the body of the car, the driver, and all the other things which go along with it, how they can shave off even microseconds, milliseconds, and that makes a difference in terms of which company actually wins the drivers championship, and which company actually wins the instructors championship. So you have two types. So that is where I've taken the example of McLaren Mercedes here to show that these 5 performance objectives which we have to work with, cost, quality, time, speed, and dependability, is something which is explained with an example to show evaluation of how it works within an organization.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Cool.
So first 2, our learning outcomes basically focus on, understanding the essence of operations management, key functions within operation management, the key concepts of the 3 E's and the 5 performance objectives, which we look at. Those are to be understood to understand this unit theoretically.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Learning outcomes 3.
Perfect.
actually focus on certain techniques, which are techniques like critical path analysis, fishbone diagram, linear programming. Those are techniques which are tools and techniques which are used in operations management to be able to predict, calculate, time, cost, and efficiency. So if I look at, I think in the learning outcome 3 and 4, my suggestion would be to understand them from an example that sometimes maybe in the earlier years we've studied problems like, I have 2 people who work and produce this output, but if I have 3 people working together, how quickly can you complete this work, or what kind of an output will this person produce? So an example would be, I have John who paints 1,000 meter of fence per day. But I have, for example, another person like John, John's, competitor, which is basically, Dave, and he's able to paint, 900 yards or 900, yards of fence every day. But and between the two, I know who's more efficient. So I know John is clearly efficient because he's painting 1,000 yards, and Dave is painting only 900 yards. Now, if I have both of them working together, what kind of an output which they'll produce? That does not mean literally they will produce 1,900 yards or 1,900 yards of fence will be painted on that day. No. What we want to be able to look at combinations of, how John and Dave can actually work together to increase output. Can I look at, John working half a day and, Dave working half a day, and the next day both of them work together? Can they produce more output? And this is what we will understand, the concept of, techniques like linear programming, which are used by operations managers to predict the output or predict the, output in terms of efficiency, productivity, cost and time and quality. And these techniques we will study in Learning Outcome 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my suggestion to you would be to go through the slides, and if you have any particular questions or if you have any particular queries,
Sure.
anything, drop me an email and I will clarify that, and we'll recap when we start Learning Outcome 3 next time.
Yeah. You told me that fishbone is like a root cause analysis, right? Because I have some idea about this also. The fishbone.
Yes, there are about 6 or 7 different tools. There is something called
like resources, methods, people like this, yeah, and then there will be step by step how to find the root causes, right? Like this.
Yes. So when sometimes you have to understanding the root cause of problems and you have to detect that.
Yes.
Use these kind of tools, Pareto diagrams, check sheets, scatter diagrams, fishbone diagrams, graphs and flowcharts, and this is all the tools and techniques that we need to know about when we study operations management.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Deepak, I'll catch up with you next time, and hopefully, if you have any queries or questions, you can send them across to me on email.
Sure, definitely.